Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I actually don't like the blurred background, so let me undo. Okay. I am coming to you because I was watching Love and Death. I've heard so much about it on Twitter, and I was like, what is this? And so I started watching it on HBO Max, or it's now called Max. And let's talk about a couple things. First of all, this is based on a true story. The woman who is in the midst of this is called, I think her name is what? Kathy? Candy. Candy. And she decides that she has an affair. She wanted to have an affair with someone at her church because they're all at this church. And what's so fascinating about this is the first three episodes, I have absolutely no idea what's going on. Like, why do I care about this woman having an affair? And then it gets to the fourth episode. And well, no. Yeah, the fourth episode. And that's when Candy and her boyfriend, no, and her she was dating, sleeping with one of the ladies' husbands at the down at the church. They break up. And then that happens in the third episode because he went to marriage counseling. And so then she decides she's going to go to marriage counseling with her husband. And it didn't quite work for her husband because her husband is like this emotional kind of dude and really not as receptive. He's a professor. Hmm. Well, what's most fascinating is that Candy ends up killing the woman. To be fair, from what we know, because we don't know, the woman attacks her. The husband's wife attacks her first, and then she defends herself by with the hatchet, with the axe, and then she kills the woman with 40 times. The thing that bothers me about it is that she knows that this woman had a child, and she's watching the other child. She continues to watch the other child. She goes back to church, and she has a story that I think for me would be suspicious because it seems so rehearsed that she tells people the same story all over town, all over town. And but she just leaves the baby there. The baby, I thought it was just a few hours. Come to find out the baby was there for like 14, 15 hours, 18 hours or something. No food, soiled diaper. Like if she's saying, I didn't think about the baby. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this poor child who probably just starved herself. I just, and the poor dogs are probably just would have been, this is what I don't understand. The baby is crying so much. I'm surprised that the dogs didn't bark so much that the neighbors were like, what the hell? Because usually dogs bark a lot when the baby cries, well, from my experience. So, anywho, he was out of town and people thought that he killed his wife, but eventually it gets out because he admits to being having an affair with Candy. And Candy doesn't cover her tracks completely. And then she had to kind of admit that she did kill the woman and it was in self-defense. Interestingly enough, nobody likes the woman. I think her name is Betsy or something. Betty. Nobody likes Betty. And I'm going to say Elizabeth Olsen plays such a good job and HBO does a really good job in producing Love and Death. I say all this because after I watched Love and Death, I moved myself over to Hulu and I watched Candy. Now, um, The person who plays Candy is Jessica Biel. And Jessica Biel does not, I don't like the wig. I don't like her performance in this at all. And her husband's in it. He's a Justin Timberlake is in it, and he's a deputy. And I think they really get into how they really show how much more Betty is unliked. And I think that's a little bit unfair that nobody really liked Betty. And you can't find anybody who did like her. I mean, they really was like, she's an awful person. She's a cool person, but she's kind of awful. She was a bit much. People clearly, when you say she's a bit much, they really behind closed doors are like she's not a good person. I kind of don't like that aspect of it. But what's interesting is she's not convicted. They find her not guilty. I think this is a bias because she's a woman. But I also think that it wasn't self-defense, but I also think that there's a bit of heartlessness that comes into just leaving the baby there for 18 hours. Um, long-term effects. Interesting is that Betty's husband remarried instantly because he married the organist and then they got divorced. That's the thing about church folks. Sometimes as soon as somebody dies, somebody's like knocking on your door with food. A woman's knocking on the door with food. I'm up. You available? And I want to move in. Church women move fast when there's a husband who gets recently divorced or the woman dies. Anyway, so he's dead. Okay, so he gets remarried to the organist, and his Betty's parents adopt their kids because he divorces the organist and gets married to somebody else. How about that? And Candy and her husband move to Georgia and then they get divorced. And she becomes a marriage family counselor with her daughter. How fun is that? Um, her defense attorney runs for governor, and they don't mention it in the Hulu documentary, but they mention in the HBO that he commits suicide. I just think this is such a fascinating thing, but I will say that if you are going to watch can this more about this, I'd watch Candy first because Candy is just a little bit less of a budget, so it's not as polished. And then I'd watch the HBO one or the Max one because that's way more polished. But I mean, it's still very entertaining. It's a very interesting story. And I do think that it's worth watching overall.